Hey everyone, welcome back to Whiteboard Friday. We're continuing our series on metrics that matter. And the last two sessions we had, we talked about two important areas of metrics. One was quality, and the other was coverage. And today we're going to be talking about the last one, which is going to be around velocity. And every time people think about velocity, think about how fast are we moving? How fast are we moving in a test sprint, a test cycle, a test suite? How fast are we closing defects? How fast are we doing all these different activities, right? But we also want to look at things that possibly could be impeding that velocity as well. So we're going to talk about, again, some core reports that everyone kind of should be taking a look at some of those extra reports, and then give you some pro tips as well. I think about some things that are maybe a little bit outside of what you may have not have thought of. So let's get into talking about some of those core reports. The first one is a report that everyone really likes to know of, and it's more of like a burn-up chart, but it's really referred to in the testing world as more of a planned versus executed type reporting. Everyone wants to know, based off of what's actually planned, you can see here this blue line shows the number of planned test cases we have versus the number of tests that actually have occurred. So this tells me a couple things. One is that we're not going to meet, or we're not meeting our planned executions, right? We've got a lot of passing and failing and a lot of unexecuted right here. However, what you can also see in this graph is that if we had kept this line maybe the same, so if we had moved it off to the right here, what you may have noticed is that maybe we could have caught up to actually meeting that deadline. So maybe you're over planning the tests you have. The other thing is that if you're maybe not be over planning, but you may are focusing on areas of the application that may have halted that particular growth of meeting that planned deadline. So right here you can see that there's a large dip up in the planned, and we didn't actually match that in terms of executing. So looking at your plan versus executed will help with looking at your next sprint, your next cycle, to be overplanned, to be underplanned for that. Next is looking at the inflow rate of your user stories you're going to need to test, and also the test cases that you're creating, or charters, wherever you have. So as you have an inflow rate, it should match the number of test cases you're aligning with these particular requirements. If I had test cases that were way down here and requirements were shooting way up, that shows me that the inflow rate that I'm having for requirements is not matching the tests I need to actually create to actually cover these requirements. So looking at making sure that you're not overstaffing or understaffing the amount of resources that needed to actually cover these particular requirements. The next one is looking at, and I'll move over here, looking at a closed versus open rate for your particular defects. And so what this means is that if we are opening defects and closing them at the same rate, then we're doing well. We're pretty much netting out in terms of what's going on. However, towards the end over here, you can actually see that the open and close, we're actually deviating from each other. So we're actually opening more than we're actually closing. So what's going on here? Possibly we're finding and opening more severity and critical and maybe more complex defects towards the end of a cycle, and our development team simply does not have the time to actually fix these. So maybe we need to revamp our testing strategy to find these severe defects more up at the front here versus at the very end. For some of those extra reports, one I like to look at is average complexity. So what's the complexity of our test cases, and how is that actually growing from release to release? So if you look at release 1 and release 2 here, you can see that the high complexity test cases stayed constant at 30 and 30. But when we went to release 3, what we did was we moved a bunch of low complexity test cases to the right, and now I have 70% of my test cases are actually high complexity. So what is that going to do to the actual overall planned execution that I'm actually tracking, right? Looking at the complexity of the test cases, looking at the actual percentages of those in your testing cycles, that's going to affect how much you're actually going to be able to get done. More complex usually means more time. And then looking at a charter bug detection rate, and this is a pretty cool pie chart, and what this does is it breaks down the number of test cases you have. So for example, if I've got 70 test cases that make up this pie graph, and I have 25 charters that make up this section of the pie graph, you can notice that I've actually got 75 test cases only yielded 20 bugs. And the 20 charters that I had actually yielded 30 bugs. So is our time better spent in creating maybe high complexity test cases that are step-by-step type test cases that are only going to yield 20 bugs, or should we focus more time on less overhead and create charters that could produce even more bugs in the application? So this is a good breakdown of looking at where our speed and time should be allocated to based off test cases versus a particular charter you may want to use for your testing. And then some pro tips here is looking at analytics per tester. And again, this is again not to create competition between one another, but create a healthy dialogue as well to figure out kind of who's actually testing what and what are the results of that testing to learn from each other. And I've got 3 people here. I've got Ryan, Allie, and Kyle. And you can see here that Ryan, that's me, I actually did the best out of this chart here. I'll show you why. But what I found is that Ryan found 5 bugs, and they were all Sev1, or 4 of them were Sev1 bugs, and I only executed 25 test cases, right? Kyle actually found 25 bugs. Only 2 of them were our Sev1 bugs. And he actually executed about 4 times as more as I did, right? So he's running 100 test cases, whereas I'm running 25, and I found 4 Sev defects. He found 2, and my defect density for this is actually much better than his. So out of my 5, I've got 4 Sev1 defects. Out of his 25, he's only got 2. So maybe a lot of them, or maybe the 23 of them could have been cosmetic, right? So am I doing better in terms of what am I planning to execute, how am I designing my test cases? It's good to like talk to one another and share these results to help one another out so that we're all finding these Sev1 defects first rather than at the end of a particular cycle. And then the last one is looking at the manual overhead of what could be impeding your velocity of executing test cases. And this is what I would do. I would look at all your test cases that you have, the average time that's taking you to actually run these test cases, the number of times you've executed them, the days since you, how many times it's actually been manual, so how many days you have that it hasn't been moved to an automated fashion, so almost roughly a third of the year we've got, and we're still running these test cases, and then what type of complexity is it at? And with this data, what you can look at is, one, if this complexity was low, this may be like, okay, we can make this a candidate for automation right away. But since it's high, this may tell us, why it's been 100 days as a manual test case, right? Maybe it's too complex for us also to automate. But it may be to the effect where if it is even high, we're going to look at the average time you're spending, how many times you're executing it, and looking at, okay, can we get rid of this as a manual overhead and move it to an automated type fashion? So those are some of the velocity reports that we've talked about today from core, extra, and some pro tips, looking at some of the velocity statistics for speed, but also things that could impede that velocity as well. So come back next time. We'll have a lot more to talk about for Whiteboard Friday on metrics that matter. We hope to see you again. Hey everyone, Ryan Yakman here with QASymphony. Thanks for watching Whiteboard Friday. For more videos, visit QASymphony.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hope to see you soon.